a single pocket watch, frozen at 4:00. That is the only piece of evidence recovered from the surface of Lake Huron after a massive, steel-hulled freighter simply ceased to exist. In September 1924, the SS Clifton was a marvel of modern maritime engineering, a whaleback vessel designed to shrug off the most punishing gales the Great Lakes could muster. Yet, in the blink of an eye, she vanished, taking 30 souls into the abyss without a single distress signal, a flare, or a fragment of debris hitting the shore. For nearly a century, she became a phantom, a whisper in the fog that defied every investigation. How does a titan of industry turn into a ghost story overnight? Was it a mechanical catastrophe, a hidden design failure, or did the lake itself claim what it refused to let go? The answers lie deep below the waves, hidden in plain sight. Stay with me until the very end as we descend into the graveyard of the Great Lakes to finally unmask the truth behind the Clifton's final, silent voyage. In 1892, the Pickens Mather Company commissioned a new iron ore carrier from the American Steel Barge Company in West Superior, Wisconsin. Christened the Samuel Mather, she was the second of 7 vessels to bear that name. To the eyes of 1,892, she was a marvel of the whaleback design, a unique, cigar-shaped hull created by Captain Alexander McDougall, a Scottish-born seaman frustrated with the limitations of standard barge towing. McDougall's design, popular between 1887 and 1898, looked more like a submarine than a freighter. It was meant to be hydrodynamic, cutting through the water with minimal resistance, yet it created a brutal living environment. Without portholes and with strictly limited ventilation, the interior spaces were awkward, dark, humid, and often smelled of bilge and decay. It is no surprise that crews, forced to live in these cramped conditions lit by single oil lamps, dubbed them pig boats. When fully loaded, the deck was almost entirely submerged, creating a shuddering, claustrophobic environment where work topside was a perilous task, requiring men to cling to lifelines just to perform the most mundane duties. Despite these hardships, the Samuel Mather was a success, hauling iron ore for over 31 years without a major incident. By 1923, however, she was deemed obsolete, and she was purchased by the Progress Steamship Company of Cleveland, Ohio, and renamed the Clifton. Her new owners had lofty, avaricious ambitions for the aging pig boat. They saw profit in her sturdy iron bones. The Great Lakes were at the heart of a booming industrial revolution, demanding faster, heavier, and more frequent shipments of raw materials. Yet, the safety regulations of the era remained primitive, consistently trailing behind the rapid evolution of shipping technology. The transformation of the aging Samuel Mather was a bold, calculated maneuver orchestrated by Letham D. Smith, a man whose influence permeated every corner of the maritime industry in the Great Lakes region. Smith was a Sturgeon Bay shipyard owner and a titan of vertical integration. He owned the very yard where these conversions were executed, controlled the docks where the ships would load, managed the quarries that produced the stone, and held significant shares in the Progress Steamship Company itself. To Smith, the Clifton was a vital cog in a highly efficient, closed-loop machine designed to extract maximum value from every single ton of cargo moved across the lakes. As the vessel entered Smith's yard, the conversion process began a redesign intended to reinvent an iron ore carrier as a pioneering self-loading stone carrier. Smith's vision was conceptually elegant, but structurally invasive. He engineered a complex system featuring a massive conveyor belt running along the ship's keel at the very bottom of the hopper-like holds. This mechanism was designed to carry material to a vertical bucket arrangement, lifting it topside to a discharge boom equipped with yet another conveyor belt, effectively allowing the ship to bypass traditional port infrastructure and deliver stone directly to any shoreline. On paper, it was a stroke of genius, granting the Clifton the unique utility to service smaller, underdeveloped ports that lacked the manpower or equipment to unload bulk cargo. However, this innovation arrived with a hidden. The installation of this heavy unloading machinery significantly increased the ship's top weight and fundamentally altered her center of gravity. While the engineering specifics of how these changes were factored or perhaps ignored remain lost to history, the physical reality was undeniable. The ship's stability profile had been irreversibly compromised. Furthermore, these modifications necessitated a larger crew, pushing the ship's complement to 30 souls or more to manage the complex, finicky unloading gear. This created what could be termed the economics of disaster. In the strict, unyielding hierarchy of Great Lakes shipping, iron ore carriers were the undisputed kings, serviced by dedicated, high-capital infrastructure and seasoned, well-paid crews. Stone carriers, by comparison, were often treated as second-tier vessels' workhorses expected to labor under less than ideal conditions. Smith's model was laser-focused on maximizing throughput and minimizing operational costs, but in the process, he pushed a century-old hull, designed for a different era and a different cargo, to its absolute structural limit. One is forced to ask, was this true ingenuity, or was it a reckless, greedy gamble placed squarely on the shoulders of an unsuspecting crew? The departure of the SS Clifton from Sturgeon Bay at 4 p.m. on that fateful Saturday, the 20th of September 1924, carried an outward veneer of calm that masked the precarious, fragile reality of the vessel's condition. At the helm stood Captain Emmett D. Gallagher, a mariner whose reputation for order was as unyielding as the iron hull he commanded. Those who served under him described Gallagher as a man of profound, almost religious method. His cabin was kept in an immaculate state. His navigational charts were meticulously indexed, and every item under his authority served a deliberate purpose. He took a quiet, unshakable pride in his charge, most notably in the ship's pilot house clock, a 30-hour Seth Thomas movement that he insisted be wound with exact rhythmic precision every 24 hours. For Gallagher, this rigid discipline was far more than mere habit. It was a necessary psychological buffer against the volatile, often lethal unpredictability of the Great Lakes, a way to impose human structure upon an environment that inherently resisted it. Despite Gallagher's disciplined leadership, the Clifton was a vessel in deep crisis, long before she cast off the dock. Loaded with 2,200 tons of heavy stone destined for the Birmingham Sand and Stone Company in Detroit, the ship remained dangerously short-handed. It was a perennial, exhausting struggle for the pig boats of that era to retain a stable, experienced crew. But the Clifton was particularly notorious for her cramped, humid, and grueling working conditions, a miserable, claustrophobic environment that saw sailors come and go with alarming frequency. To fill the gaping holes in the roster, Gallagher and his chief engineer, Walter J. Ortlin, were forced to scramble, recruiting whoever was willing to sign on in the waning hours. The ship's head cook, Stevenson, found himself without an assistant at the final hour, and his wife stepped in to fill the void, bringing along their 9-year-old daughter for what was promised to be a simple, uneventful voyage to Detroit. The crew that Gallagher managed to scrunch together at the very last minute included young, adventurous spirits like 21-year-old Robert Steedman, the son of a prominent local bank president, and 19-year-old Harold Hart. Both were best friends. Drawn to the water for a brief taste of adventure, planning to make only this single fateful voyage. Unlike the gritty, common stereotype of the desperate, wandering seaman, these young men were driven by a youthful, burning curiosity, a symptom of the culture of adventure that defined the spirit of the early 20th century. For them, the Great Lakes represented a rite of passage, a way to test their mettle in a rapidly modernizing world that seemed to hold fewer and fewer true frontiers. There were whispers and uneasy feelings among the local men in Sturgeon Bay who knew the Cliftons' reputation, a lingering sense of foreboding that remained unvoiced as the ship prepared to depart. As these men, each harboring his own ambitions, each leaving behind a family waiting in the quiet towns of the lakeshore. As the Clifton eased into Lake Michigan, she passed the Lansing Shoal Lighthouse and later the old Manistee Point Lighthouse, where a telegraph was dispatched to report her position. By the early hours of September 21, however, the atmosphere, which had been deceptively tranquil, began to rot. As the ship cleared the sheltered South Channel and breached the open, unforgiving expanse of Lake Huron, she was met by a gale that gathered strength with terrifying hydraulic violence. The wind hunted, stacking the frigid lake water into monstrous vertical walls that sought to overwhelm the vessel's compromised center of gravity. It was near 40 Mile Point that the Clifton met her final witness. At 11 a.m., Captain Alex Cunning, steering the upbound salvage tug Favorite, spotted the freighter laboring against the tightening, suffocating grip of the wind. In a haunting observation that would later be etched into the grim annals of maritime history, Cunning noted with professional, detached concern the Clifton was taking water over her decks but making good weather of it. He had no way of knowing, as his tug pulled away into the churning gray haze, that he was the last human being to set eyes upon the Clifton for more than 9 decades. His testimony would become the final, fleeting snapshot of a ship destined to be scrubbed from the surface of the earth. While the Clifton fought for her life in the open lake, the lonely sentinels, the lighthouse keepers at 40 Mile Point, watched from their isolated towers. These men lived in a state of perpetual, nerve-wracking vigil, listening to the guttural, primal roar of the gale and the rhythmic, hollow tolling of fog bells through the thickening gloom. To a keeper, the storm was no mere meteorological abstraction. It was a physical, sentient force that rattled the heavy glass of the lantern room and pressed against the very walls of his home like a predatory beast. In the suffocating, absolute darkness of that night, they would have seen nothing but the churning, white-capped wrath of Huron. The Clifton, a vessel engineered for the ambitions of a different age, was left completely alone in that darkness. When the gale finally exhausted its fury upon the churning expanse of Lake Huron, a chilling, absolute silence settled over the water, a stark, haunting contrast to the hydraulic violence that had just transpired. The SS Clifton was long overdue in Detroit, and as the hours bled into days, the simple voyage that Captain Gallagher had meticulously planned transformed into an agonizing, deepening mystery that gripped the maritime community. The lake, which had been a white-capped monster, eventually smoothed over, guarding its new acquisition with a deceptive, glassy serenity. Desperate search parties were immediately dispatched, but they found only the scattered, pathetic remnants of a life that had ceased to exist. A few splintered life rafts, several empty hatch covers that had been ripped away by the relentless sea, and small bits of flotsam that hinted at a sudden, catastrophic end. The most haunting, visceral discovery of the entire search effort was a small, unassuming pocket watch recovered from the surface. It was found still attached to a waterlogged fragment of wreckage, its delicate, intricate internal mechanisms frozen in time by the icy, crushing grip of the lake. The hands were permanently locked at 4, the exact moment the Clifton had vanished from the world of the living. It was as if the lake itself had reached out to halt the passage of time, leaving this single, frozen relic to serve as the only testimony for the 30 souls who never reached their destination. Despite exhaustive, frantic search efforts that combed the unforgiving waters for days, not a single body was ever recovered. The crew simply evaporated, claimed by the abyss, leaving their families in a state of perpetual, unresolved mourning for ghosts that would never be brought home to rest. This tragedy quickly permeated the maritime culture of the Great Lakes, giving rise to mournful, sorrowful ballads such as the Seaman's Lament. For years, these songs served as the only tombstone for the Clifton, weaving the story of her final, silent voyage into the dark, enduring folklore of the region. Yet, history remains a fickle and often careless archivist. When we analyze the legacy of the Clifton, we cannot help but contrast it with the iconic, globally recognized demise of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. While the Fitzgerald erupted into a massive cultural phenomenon, immortalized in chart-topping songs, feature-length documentary films, and persistent, decades-long forensic debate, the Clifton largely faded into the gray, indifferent fog of the past. Why does one tragedy become a legendary, immutable cornerstone of history, while the other remains a mere whisper in the dark? The answer lies in the nature of the era. The Fitzgerald was a modern giant, a steel-hulled icon of her time that fell while the world was watching through the lens of mass media, satellite imagery, and advanced communication. Her story was codified by the instantaneous, visceral nature of modern news. The Clifton, conversely, was an aging pigboat from a bygone era, lost in a time when maritime communication was primitive, radio was still in its infancy, and public records remained frustratingly incomplete. She was a relic of the early Industrial Revolution, forgotten largely because her specific era of risk was rapidly eclipsed by the monumental, high-profile disasters that would follow in the decades after. For 92 years, the SS Clifton remained a ghost, a legend, entombed beneath the shifting, silty sands and the frigid, lightless currents of Lake Huron. Since her disappearance in 1924, she became the holy grail for shipwreck hunters, not only due to the inexplicable nature of her vanishing, but because she was the only remaining whaleback freighter lost in Lake Huron that had yet to be found. The search was a monumental challenge, hindered by the sheer, daunting scale of the lake. Huron spans 25,000 square miles, with over 9,000 of those miles lying within U.S. waters. For decades, the narrative of her loss was defined by suffocating, fragmented speculation. Was it the flawed unloading system, a catastrophic mechanical failure, or simple human error? Renowned maritime archaeologist and diver David Trotter, who had spent 40 years unearthing over 60 previously undiscovered wrecks, including the Keystone State, the four-masted Minnedosa, and the 436-foot Hydrus, considered the Clifton the top priority on his to-do list. Trotter began his dedicated search in 1987. Nearly 30 years later, in June 2016, his team recorded coordinates for a target while working on a project involving 2 other wrecks. In September 2016, divers descended into the dark, silent depths to make visual contact. Upon surfacing, a diver excitedly reported that the wreck was a whaleback. Trotter immediately concluded they had found the Clifton. the only missing whaleback in the lake. To ensure absolute certainty, the team conducted meticulous follow-up dives, using action cameras throughout July and August 2017. Finally, on the 21st of September 2017, the 93rd anniversary of the ship's last sighting, Trotter formally announced the discovery. The find was a profound personal milestone, occurring remarkably just 100 meters away from where historians had predicted, though the ship lay nearly 100 miles from her last reported position. As the divers explored the site, they found a hull that told a far more violent, sudden, and singular story than any mechanical failure could explain. The wreckage effectively dismantled the long-standing theory that the ship's heavy unloading conveyor system had broken loose and caused the ship to capsize. Instead, forensic observations revealed the propeller was still intact and the rudder locked straight, indicating the ship had been steaming in a straight line before the end. The wreck now rests at a 45-degree angle, heavily listed to port. The physical condition of the bow offered a chilling, irrefutable explanation. The front of the ship had been crushed inward, collapsing by an astounding 40 feet. This specific structural failure, combined with the wreck's orientation, provides the forensic signature of a rogue wave, a liquid sledgehammer that struck the vessel broadside. To truly understand this fate, one must appreciate the volatile hydrodynamics of Lake Huron. Unlike the vast, open oceans where waves have space to dissipate, the Great Lakes possess a treacherous, shallow bathymetry. When gale force winds align perfectly with this geography, the water undergoes constructive interference. Multiple wave trains collide, stealing energy from one another to construct a singular, towering wall of water that emerges without warning. In the case of the Clifton, such a wave struck with thousands of tons of unrelenting hydraulic pressure, overwhelming the ship's center of gravity in a heartbeat, forcing the bow to fold inward like a crushed tin can before the vessel slipped beneath the surface, leaving absolutely no time for a distress call, a flare, or even a final prayer. This discovery serves as a haunting, necessary correction to our historical understanding of the tragedy. It reminds us that no matter how much industrial progress we achieve, the human endeavor remains hauntingly fragile in the face of the Great Lakes' unbridled primordial power. The Clifton was a victim of a colossal environmental phenomenon that our early 20th century ancestors were fundamentally ill-equipped to comprehend or survive. As we look at the wreckage today, resting in the cold, silt, and eternal shadows of the lake bed, we are forced to confront the true human price of industrial ambition. The 30 souls who perished aboard the Clifton were pioneers of a sort, workers powering the machinery of an expanding, hungry nation, only to be overtaken by the very forces of the world they sought to navigate and conquer. Their resting place is not merely a lonely grave of iron and stone. It is a profound, solemn testament to the smallness of man in the face of nature's indifference. The Clifton stands now as a silent sentinel, a lesson etched into the lake bed for every vessel that sails these waters today, that for all our steel, all our hubris, and all our careful calculations, the Great Lakes remain the final, silent arbiters of our fate, perpetually demanding a respect that many, in the heat of ambition, often forget to give. Much like the tragic, structural hubris that claimed the SS Clifton beneath the dark waters of Lake Huron, the story of the James B. Colgate serves as a haunting bookend to an era where human ambition often outpaced the realities of maritime engineering. Built in 1892, the James B. Colgate, much like the Clifton, was a technological marvel, a pig boat that carried the hopes of a burgeoning industrial age. Constructed by the American Steel Barge Company at West Superior, Wisconsin, the Colgate was a triumph of 1890s engineering. She measured 308 feet in length, with a 38-foot beam and a depth of 24 feet, boasting a gross tonnage of 1,713. Her cylindrical hull tapered to rounded conoidal bow and stern sections, an innovative form that minimized wind and water resistance. Beneath her deck lay a single, massive cargo hold, accessible through multiple hatches spaced at 24-foot centers, allowing for efficient self-trimming of bulk cargoes. Powered by a 1,000-horsepower triple-expansion steam engine, she was capable of hauling up to 3,500 tons of freight, serving as a vital gear in the machine of American steel production. Launched on the 21st of September 1892 and entering service just weeks later, the Colgate immediately integrated into the seasonal rhythms of the lakes. For 24 years, she navigated the treacherous choke points of the Soo Locks and the expansive shipping lanes between Lake Superior and Lake Erie. She survived the volatile currents of an era before modern radar, radio, or satellite forecasting, building a reputation for durability that bordered on the invincible. To those who sailed her, she was not just a ship. She was a reliable workhorse, a steel-hulled veteran that had weathered countless gales, including the catastrophic Great Storm of 1913. Despite her sterling record, the Colgate and the whaleback class at large carried inherent design vulnerabilities. The very features that made her efficient were her undoing in extreme conditions. The whaleback's low freeboard meant that her rounded decks were nearly awash when fully loaded, leaving her susceptible to heavy water ingress. Her flush-mounted, bolted hatch covers, while excellent for minimizing wind resistance, were difficult to secure in a raging gale. Her low profile also made her nearly invisible to other vessels in fog or heavy spray, leading to perilous near misses. By 1916, the James B. Colgate had transitioned through several owners, from the American Steel Barge Company to the Bessemer Steamship Company, then to the Pittsburgh Steamship Company, a subsidiary of U.S. Steel, and finally, in 1915, to the Standard Transit Company of Duluth. She was an aging veteran of 24 years, structurally sound but lacking the modern, technological safeguards that would eventually become standard. She relied entirely on visual signaling and manual navigation, leaving her crew isolated in the face of sudden meteorological shifts. On the eve of the 20th of October 1916, Lake Erie was a powder keg. The remnants of an Atlantic hurricane had collided with a high-pressure system over the western Great Lakes, creating a rapid, explosive drop in atmospheric pressure. This perfect storm would go down in history as the Black Friday gale. As the Colgate departed Buffalo, New York, shortly after midnight, loaded with a cargo of hard coal destined for Fort William, Ontario, storm warnings were already signaling trouble. Captain Walter J. Grashaw, who had served as the ship's first mate for a decade, was now commanding the vessel on his first voyage as master. The crew of 26 men, including experienced mariners like Chief Engineer Charles E. Sutcliffe and second mate George Kuhn, placed their trust in the Colgate's long-proven reputation. They sailed out into the dark, ignoring the caution of other captains who chose to remain anchored behind the breakwater. As the day progressed, the weather deteriorated with terrifying speed. Winds roared at 70 to 75 miles per hour, generating 30-foot waves in the shallow waters of Lake Erie. Water began to breach the hatches, overwhelming the pumps and causing the vessel to develop a dangerous list to port. By evening, the storm had transformed from a challenge into a wall of water. The tarpaulins shielding the hatches were shredded by the hurricane-force winds, making it impossible for the crew to seal the ship. The efficient design had become a trap. Around 10 p.m., approximately 12 miles off Long Point, Ontario. The James B. Colgate succumbed to the hydraulic violence of the lake. She foundered bow first, settling rapidly into the dark, frigid depths. The speed of the sinking was absolute. There was no time for distress flares or manual signals. The ship simply vanished, pulling her crew into the icy vortex. 26 men were cast into the freezing water. The ship's life-saving equipment proved inadequate for the conditions, as lifeboats could not be launched amid the chaos, forcing the crew to rely on life preservers that were largely ineffective in the high seas and frigid waters. Some attempted to use a makeshift raft. Captain Grashaw, fighting for his life, found himself clinging to a small makeshift raft, a 5x5 platform that was little more than a piece of debris. He was eventually joined by second engineer Harry Osman and an unidentified coal passer. For the next 2 days, the 3 men endured an ordeal beyond comprehension. The raft capsized twice in the relentless seas, plunging them back into the numbing cold. The coal passer was swept away by a massive wave, and later, exhaustion claimed Osman, who perished overboard. Grashaw, often slipping into unconsciousness from hypothermia, remained lashed to the raft as the storm screamed around him. He drifted for 30 hours, an isolated speck of human life on a hostile, surging desert of water. On the morning of Sunday, October 22, the car ferry Marquette and Bessemer, no two spotted the nearly lifeless Grashaw adrift off Rondeau, Canada, approximately opposite Cleveland, Ohio, and hauled him aboard. Rescuers described him as prostrate and half dead from the ordeal, and he was rushed to a hospital in Canute, Ohio, where his wife joined him at his bedside as he fought for recovery in critical condition. In the days following, Grashaw provided detailed accounts to reporters, naming the lost crew, including Chief Engineer Charles E. Sutcliffe, Second Mate George Kuhn, First Mate Larson, and Stewart Ralph Kuhn, and emphasizing the suddenness of the disaster that claimed all 26 others, with no bodies ever recovered from the depths. The tragedy left a profound scar on the maritime community. Captain Grashaw's story became a focal point for grief and a symbol of the immense human cost of Great Lakes shipping. He lived the rest of his life bearing the weight of the disaster, forever haunted by the men he could not save. For 75 years, the James B. Colgate lay in the silence of the lake bed, an unlocated mystery of Lake Erie. It wasn't until 1991 that a team of divers finally discovered the wreck 12 miles southeast of Erie, Ontario. Lying in 85 feet of water, the vessel rests inverted, her hull largely intact and preserved by the sediment of the lake bottom. Today, the site is protected under the Ontario Heritage Act, serving as a protected archaeological resource and a solemn memorial. Annual remembrances, held around October 20, continue to honor the 26 souls who perished. Scholars, maritime enthusiasts, and museums like the National Museum of the Great Lakes use the Colgate as a definitive case study in the perils of early 20th century freighting. Her story is chronicled in numerous works, including David R. Frew's Pigs at Sea and David D. Swayze's Shipwreck, ensuring that while the ship is gone, the lessons of the Black Friday storm endure. The James B. Colgate stands as a final, silent arbiter of fate. She reminds us that invincible is not a physical property, but a story we tell ourselves to mask our smallness in the face of nature's indifference. In the cold, dark depths of Lake Erie, the Colgate remains a testament to the industrial pioneers who navigated the lakes, reminding every sailor who passes above her that the Great Lakes demand a respect that the heat of ambition often blinds us to. The 25 men lost in the dark were not just sailors. They were the heartbeat of an expanding nation, and their memory is forever etched into the shifting, silty sands of the lake bed, a silent, enduring sentinel of the deep. Finally, Before we conclude today, I want to extend my deepest gratitude for joining me on this journey into the dark history of the Great Lakes. By exploring the tragic fates of the SS Clifton and the James B. Colgate, we have bridged the gap between our modern world and the forgotten sacrifices of those who perished beneath the waves. These stories, once buried in the silt of time, serve as a haunting reminder of the cost of industrial ambition. If this account resonated with you, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel to help us keep these maritime legacies alive. We are committed to unearthing the truths that history has often left behind. Do you have a personal connection to the Great Lakes? Or is there another maritime tragedy you would like us to investigate? Please share your thoughts and suggestions in the comments section below. I read every one of them, and your insights often shape our future projects. Thank you for watching, and I truly look forward to seeing you in our next deep dive, where we will continue our mission to honor the mysteries resting beneath the surface.